Hello, welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we're talking about Summer Games Fest and could it take over E3? Could it be the E3 replacement that we are all looking for? And I think it could be, but we've got to do a couple things first. So the number one thing Summer Games Fest needs is just more companies involved with it. We need Nintendo on board, we need PlayStation on board, and listen, all of that is going to come with time, and Keighley has done a pretty good job of over the years getting more and more companies to come through for the event. This year we've got Ubisoft, and we've got Xbox, and we've got a bunch of different indies, and all these things, and he did a pretty good job of tempering expectations, telling people this isn't gonna be E3, and you have to understand that, because when E3 ended, it was this huge thing that had been going for 20 years, was a trade show initially, and eventually turned into this media fan-forward event. But Summer Games Fest is starting in its infancy, and I think all we gotta do is give it a little bit of time, and it could eventually turn into something really, really cool, similar to what E3 was. Another thing with Summer Games Fest is usually the pacing. The pacing of these things is pretty horrific most of the time, and in every Keighley show, the pacing is always a big problem. With the Game Awards 2 years ago, it was way too long. It was like a 4-hour show. It did not need to be that long, and it was a pain in the ass to get through. But with this show this year, Keighley basically rushed everyone through all of their things, and so it feels like all we need is to meet a fun little happy medium within there, and then he has that thing on lock. But until then, it's definitely not great, and that is definitely something he needs to work on. However, with Summer Games Fest, usually it's these drawn-out, boring-esque shows with these games that all look the same, and this year, it was just snappier, but it was still a lot of games that were blending together that I didn't really care about, that just felt like actual ads for games that just truly didn't interest me in the slightest. And I understand that, you do have to pay for these shows, and an ad here or there could be a good idea. I get all that. I think Keighley is doing the best with what he has, and especially the fact that he doesn't really have major heavy hitters yet because it is such a new show. It makes sense that he's going to have to pad just a little bit in the way that he has. Now, the best thing about E3 was the fact that it brought the industry together and it forced these developers to have shit ready at this time, because every single company was involved in these shows and every single company knew that it needed to show up to E3 to promote their newest stuff. Nintendo every year had a very cool big showcase. 2018 was really cool with Smash Bros. 2017 was probably one of the best E3s I've ever seen in my life. Granted, at that point I'd probably seen like 4, so it wasn't too big of a deal, but that was hype. We got all sorts of stuff like Metroid Prime 4, which still isn't out, and we got Kirby and Yoshi and Mario Odyssey and new information about all sorts of stuff. 2019 was cool because we got the sequel to Breath of the Wild, which ended up being Tears of the Kingdom, shown at the very end. And so Nintendo usually shows up for these things in a big way, and without that structure, it leaves a lot of fans desiring more. And for a couple years there was a pain in the ass where people didn't know what to expect, didn't know what was going to happen, and that consistency that E3 brought was really invaluable to a lot of people, to myself as well, and especially now as a creator, that consistency is something you really rely on, and you really realize how important it is in order to just keep this industry going. On top of the consistency it allowed for with companies, it also had this thing of bringing both fans and developers and creators all together across all of these different mediums. Maybe you were a game dev for Call of Duty and you were there for this reason, and here's a Nintendo fan who's pulling up because of the Nintendo stuff, and here's a creator that does whatever sort of content, and they're in the fray as well. And so it just was this really cool melding pot for all of that stuff, and a lot of people will attribute that part to the downfall of E3, saying that it definitely was not the best part of it, and that there was a lot of issues that arose from it, and I can totally understand that perspective as well. But I think at the end of the day, there was some cool shit that was dropped at E3, and I really miss that consistency, to be honest. I think that's the biggest thing that I miss, is the consistency with the presentations, knowing when things were going to happen, because they put the schedule out well beforehand. You could plan for Nintendo Direct, you could plan to watch all of these things easier, and Summer Games Fest is coming back to that, and they're doing an alright job with it. But again, and they're doing an alright job with it, and I look forward to the future where everything ends up hopefully being a part of that. And one of the biggest issues with E3 was just that it was so fucking expensive for companies to be part of it, okay? It was not cost effective for a lot of them because they realized they could do these presentations, they could do these things online on their own, YouTube channels or whatever, their distribution services without the aid of E3 because it wasn't doing much for them. And Nintendo really pioneered this whole idea with the Nintendo Direct, but just the fact that after we lost E3 and everything became so spread out and distant from one another, I think that's when the whole downfall started, and it started becoming just such a pain in the ass to catch everything. You gotta follow like 20 different Twitter accounts if you want to know all the shit that's going on in the month of June with video games, and that's not an easy thing to do. It's not fun, and a lot of people who are not, hardcore into it that did tune into E3 aren't going to go through all of this shit to figure out all this schedule and all these different things to be able to just watch the companies that they sort of care about. Summer Games Fest could fix this by basically incorporating all the companies that E3 used to and giving them this one sort of place to go for everything in gaming news for that week. And I think that is a really great potential that it has, but I think we got to get there first. And I don't think Keighley has done a bad job. I think he gets a lot of flack online, but genuinely he seems to listen to a lot of the criticism and he seems to try to address it. And as long as these shows are improving year over year, that's really all we need. We got to think about the fact that E3 had 20 plus years to improve itself before a lot of us saw it. Maybe you were there at its infancy, I don't know. But I certainly wasn't. So going into Summer Games Fest, it's fair to have these higher expectations, to think you're about to see these amazing announcements. But then you have to realize this is a much smaller thing right now than E3 was when you started watching it. We're in its infancy. It's been about 3 years with that. And yeah, there's some issues, but they can be solved, and I think Keighley's doing an okay job of that. He's got to fix the pacing. He's got to get some more interesting games in the fray, but it's not terrible. The one thing that E3 really left behind when it, stopped being a thing was the fan-forward events that E3 ended up bringing later down the line. Now, a lot of people attribute the fact that they started letting, not media people in and they just started letting the general public in to the downfall of E3, but I also think that gave people something to look forward to and something to be really excited about. You can go to whatever gaming convention you want, but there's not going to be these gaming conventions where it's known worldwide like E3 was. It's super exciting because you're getting all of these different announcements and there's just a lot there that it has to offer. It was this really exciting thing for both creators and fans and even like developers to all be able to get together in this one area and talk about video games and the exciting future that they hold. Like I said, Summer Games Fest isn't necessarily doing that because you can go in and you can watch the presentation live and you can sort of have that stuff, but it's not that hands-on sort of convention-y space type thing like E3 ended up being. So I went to IGN Live just for one day, and it was basically this really fun little thing where you could play upcoming games and demos, and it was just sort of this exciting thing where it was like, hey, Summer Games Fest is happening right now alongside of this, so we're going to all be here to talk about it, is essentially what it was. And it ended up being a pretty fun event. They had a couple different rooms. They had some panels with different creators, and they also sort of brought anime into it a bit, which is interesting for some people. For me, it's really, I just could not care less, but for some people it's definitely interesting. And then they had a sort of show floor where you could just play a bunch of different demos and things that were like that, and they had like some Steam Decks there. They had a play date. I made a little short about the play date, and they had different stuff that was sort of cool, but it would be so cool if it could be like how E3 was. So if Nintendo's out here announcing some big exciting announcement at Summer Games Fest and they have, a demo of that exciting game that they just announced available at IGN Live, that's amazing. And that's what I'd like to see for the evolution of where these go in the future. I think right now we're obviously not there. This is the first one of IGN Live as well, so I completely understand that. And it just, it needs a little bit more fleshing out, but for the very first one, I thought it was all right. I got to meet some cool people that I had known online a little bit. I met Jake, I met Celia, who I do a podcast with, Game and Talk. Check that out. It's with RGT and Nate the Hate as well. Sometimes Nate gives us little exclusive scoops. But yeah, as a whole, it's a pretty cool little event. And as a whole, I think there's a lot of potential in both of these events, and both of these events basically taking over what E3 was. E3 was super exciting. It was Christmas for gamers, and I think we can bring that back, but we have to be patient and we have to give these shows just a little bit more time. Those are just my thoughts on Summer Games Fest as a whole and IGN Live, but let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you liked the video, drop it a like, subscribe to the channel, check out this video. It's a banger, it's a vibe, it's a good time. I will see you over there. Get some merch if you guys want it. But yeah, no, so, IGN Live was a pretty good time. Had a little beer, a little brewski. That was a great time.